Welcome back to another episode of When Destiny Calls. I'm Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. As always, Christy Foster is with me, and we are When Destiny Calls. So today, we thought we'd take a dive into the birth of the shadow and the archetype of the self. So without further ado, Christy, how are you doing today?
Doing better. I've been sick most of the week. So I'm a little scratchy today, but I'm feeling much better. Glad that I'm coming out of that.
That is very good to hear.
Yeah.
So what we'd like to do today is take a dive into what is shadow, because I think a lot of it, we were having a conversation earlier about how shadow is misunderstood as something that is evil. Inherently, the shadow is not evil, period. No commas, period, exclamation mark. The shadow is not, in its essence, evil. It is everything that's denied by the ego as acceptable. So, for instance, you grow up in a Christian family, so other religions are deemed evil or not good or unnecessary. And therefore, they become part of my shadow. So my interest in them, my wanting to read about them, my fascination with them, my exploration of them becomes problematic for me because my ego has made a judgment about who I am and what I am. So how is shadow born? So the first thing, we have to remember that the ego is a complex. It's what Jung calls, it's a reflection of the self. It's a tiny reflection. It's not a complete reflection of the self. The self is the architect of the psyche. So it's vast and has potentially the knowledge of all that we've been through as a species. So the projection of the ego is, it's your baby steps into the world, how you survive the world. So the more you need, the more you need to feed the ego. Okay, so if you lived on a farm, you don't need to feed the ego a lot. But if you live in the middle of a city and you're competing with millions of people, that ego needs to be fed over and over again, because it has to survive on a different plane. You're not competing with the animals on a farmland away from others. You're not competing with the rest of the world when you're in a small community. What you are doing is you're absorbing whatever is coming in. So the child takes in whatever. So what do my parents believe? Why do they light a candle? Why do they pray at night? Why do they pray in the morning? Why do they pray 5 times a day? So the child believes what the environment is feeding them over and over and over again. It doesn't mean that's going to be their existence, but that becomes a primer of the ego. It's like how the ego is constructed. Well, we have right, we have wrong, based on Judeo-Christian beliefs and ethics, whatever that means, because each family has its own. There's a larger one by the church. There's a larger one by society or the mosque or the temple. It doesn't matter. But those larger, those all feed the ego. They tell the ego how to behave. The ego needs to be told how to behave. Remember, the self is the architect of the psyche. That means the self infinitely has a lot more power, but for it to come into view, the ego needs to be stable enough to absorb more of consciousness. So we talk about the ego. The ego is in the psyche, is the center of consciousness. Okay, what does that mean? That means that at its center, it is aware of what's going on, at least in your life. So what happens when you're 3 years old and you're running around in a diaper? You've already pooped, and they're yelling at you, and they're yelling at you, and they're yelling at you, and you're laughing because you're building ego. You're building, I am independent, I am powerful, I can do whatever I want, I can stink up this place.
Which they do.
Yeah, if somebody comes about and swats that little child in the diaper, then the ego can't take that hit. The shadow is born. The shadow is born and is enraged. It's like, why am I being hit? They're bigger than me. If they weren't bigger than me, I could hit them back. So the ego cries. Because it's been violated, is because it has no power, because it's a tiny baby, because it's wearing a diaper. It cries. Shadow does not cry. Shadow plans.
Yes.
So, ego and shadow. Shadow and ego. Jung said that whatever grows in the ego grows in the shadow. The shadow, of course, I've been calling this, we've been calling it, the unknown other. The shadow is a very limited definition of what the entity is. What is it? Saying shadow also implicates people who are of darker skin are evil. That's complete misunderstanding of what the term means. So that's why the name shadow is problematic. And that's why
people
we're calling
associate it with good and bad.
Yeah.
Evil and
which is not true. The shadow is protective. The shadow is caring. The shadow is loving. People out of shadow do all kinds of wonderful things that they don't admit. They donate money. They give their time. They feed the hungry, but they don't admit. Those who you know about who do these things, that's ego.
Because they want to be seen for being good and being giving and compassionate.
They want to take credit for being human. They want to take credit for that. Shadow does not take credit. Shadow does not need credit. Ego needs credit. Shadow is what it is. Shadow is anger. Shadow is happiness. Shadow is selfishness. Shadow is contempt. Shadow is freedom. Shadow is torture. Shadow is what it is. Ego defines how it's presented or not presented.
Ego defines how shadow is presented?
Yes.
Give us an example of that.
Well, it wasn't me. So there's a song by Shaggy, this pop song, about betrayal, about getting caught with another lover, by your lover, and then not knowing how to get out of it. So the video goes, he goes to ask questions from somebody who is a player, a big person in the game, somebody who understands the game pretty well. So the first thing they say to them is like, it wasn't me. but she has me on camera. It wasn't me. So where do we hear it wasn't me first? We hear it with little kids.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you knock that over? It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't me is the ego. Every time the ego says it wasn't me, it is shifting blame. And the question is where is it shifting blame to when you got caught on camera? Well, if it wasn't me, then it was somebody inside of me. It was a bad actor. It was somebody who's dangerous, Christy. Somebody who could cause havoc. But it wasn't me. I would never do that. So the consciousness of the ego is like, well, you know, we could shift blame. I was drunk. I was high. I was driving too fast. I was upset that day.
Mm.
I was angry.
One other phrase that comes in that I've heard is this hurts me more than it hurts you. That's a
That
classic
is
line.
ego.
Yes.
That is very much ego.
But I have to do this to you so
And
you learn.
and it is the punishment of the shadow that happens when you say that.
Yeah.
The shadow is anticipating that it is going to be. The shadow is the abused other. The shadow is hiding. The unknown other is the abused other.
So if a parent hits a child and says, this hurts me more than it hurts you,
The
but we
child
have to
knows, the child knows that is bullshit.
yes. And what is the shadow of the parent trying to, what is that interaction with the shadow?
That's
And
the ego of the parent trying to say, this is coming from shadow. The ego of the parent is saying, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. That's
the
a
child
lie.
knows that's not true.
That's a lie.
Yeah, it is a lie.
And it's a lie, but it's an ego lie. It's not shadow lie. The pain that's inflicted comes from shadow. The rage, the anger, the emotions
Mm.
that are hidden behind that statement come from shadow. But the lie comes from ego.
And so if a parent spanks a child or gets angry at a child for breaking something, for example, and a parent could say, and children do this. I saw a video of my little nephew the other day. He broke his brother's Lego set, and his dad was recording it for me. And he's 3. Did you do it? No, daddy. No, daddy. And then he said, did you break that? Well, yeah. Because he wasn't afraid. I would think that's part of not being afraid of a response from a parent.
Yeah. Had the parent screamed at him, he would have kept saying no.
And then that's how that builds in a child into an adult.
Exactly.
Is what I want to tie in.
So if you keep pushing the child will deny it. It will grow in shadow. It will get deeper and deeper. It will be disassociated more and more because the child is terrified now because basically survival instincts have kicked in.
And then how does that look, Dr. Lahab, so you grow up, that little boy grows up in relationship. How does that show up in relationship dynamics if the child that was hit and the parent says, this hurts me more than it hurts you, and it continues all through his life? How does that show up in a marriage or a friendship?
Disassociation. So the shadow is disassociated from the ego. So when the shadow acts out and hits their partner, then that's how it shows up.
You shouldn't have made me angry.
You shouldn't have done that to me. It hurts me more than it hurts you.
Yeah.
It really hurts me because go on.
The shadows created, just so my brain can wrap around this, in childhood, different experiences that we've had. However, our parents were, and how do I say this? Their awareness about shadow, which probably isn't much for most parents, they start to create a complex within a child. And then you become an adult and can't figure out what's yours and what's theirs and what's mine. It sounds like it can create a lot of confusion with the self.
The complex is born from trauma. The shadow is born when the ego is born.
So are they two separate things?
The shadow and the ego are born on the same day. They are not born separately.
Okay.
When the ego realizes it has power, it also realizes it doesn't.
And then shadow grows with that.
And shadow always is right there. So when the baby cries and the mother is responsive, shadow doesn't act out. But if the baby cries too long and the mother is not responsive, then shadow acts out. Then they will bring food to the baby and shadow will still cry. Yeah. Making a statement, telling them that, hey, you left me hungry here. I don't understand why you keep doing that. And it's really upsetting to me. So it is born on that day, but most people, it was already created for them. So the way it was created for them, it's imprinted, right? It happens so early in childhood that they recreate those circumstances for their own children.
Yeah.
So shadow is born from fear, violence, anger, and survival. Out of those, shadow is born. But ego is born out of the same. Ego is not born out of something else. Ego is born out of, I need control, I need power, I need to know who I am, I need to grow. The shadow in the child is quieter because they're not physically menacing. And that's why we don't fear them. But in children, when you don't see shadow, it's dangerous. If their shadow is not readily available to you, it's very, very dangerous. That means it's very disassociated. And that means that child is very disturbed. And you could tell they're very disturbed by their ego awareness of the world around them. So how do we know that? We know that because they will define things in extremes. They will define things that is happening to them in extremes.
Give me an example of that.
So the first thing that happens is that the kindergartner goes to school and has an accident that day. They pee on themselves, they wet themselves, whatever. They don't make it to the bathroom. This happens in kindergarten all the time.
Yep, it does.
The body is still not under your control. Then it's a question of reaction. Now, because the ego has already been humiliated. So what is the ego going to do? I'm just going to say, it wasn't me. Oh, that didn't happen to me. But it happened to somebody. So somebody has to take responsibility for that. So who is that somebody? Well, it's the unknown other. Blame them. Put the bracelets on them. Put the peeing incident in their corner. And that's where the child goes, he embarrassed me. I've heard little kids talk about themselves like that. She embarrassed me. Well, you're talking about yourself.
Speaking about their shadow.
Yeah, they're talking about a different part of them. They're talking about a part of them that they're humiliated by. They fear. So what do we fear? We fear our things that we can't control. Right? Shadow is the reservoir for everything that happens to us. Whether good or bad, the reservoir is there. It builds.
And so as it builds through our life experience, and then we become adults and behaviors or reactions to things come out, and we say, I don't know who that was that just acted that way. That's an accumulation of shadow, isn't it?
It's an accumulation of shadow, but it's an accumulation of disassociation. This distinct part of me is unaware of this other part of me.
And
so that child that grows up into the world, she comes out and she says, oh, it wasn't me.
Or do they tend to blame, like, well, I grew up in this situation, and so that's why I did that, or that's why this is
No, that you
the
need
way
to
I
be
am.
conscious of. You need to go to therapy for that. You don't even have a clue about that. This is who you are.
Mm.
That requires consciousness. Consciousness requires reflection. Reflection is something that is a very expensive commodity to come by. So many people and so many instances, and especially in the media and the social network, the social media is working against it all the time.
In what way?
Lies, deception, illusion, projection.
About what they want you to believe about yourself or about them?
Most of the time they're not clear about who they are. So everybody who talks about archetypes on YouTube don't know what the hell they're talking about, because they're making them look like they're characters. They're not characters. The archetype is an entity. It's an energetic pattern. An energetic pattern that shapes the way we move in the world, the way we see the world, the way we think about the world, the way we interact in the world. Why we choose a certain career, why we date a certain person, why we connect to certain people, why we hate certain people.
Mm.
Why we're irritated by certain people.
That comes from the archetypal pattern.
That's the archetypal pattern, and that's different from our instincts, because we've also developed on this planet as a species. So we have all these instincts. Just if you want a simple thing to think about, sit at dinner and watch everybody eat. Not to be kind of like a voyeur, but think about it. The way people eat is the way they feel safe. So if they feel safe where they're eating, they're going to eat like they're not paying attention. They're just going to eat. If they're paying attention, they're being very precise of their movement, of where the food is, how it's being cut, how it's being put in their mouth. Right? So what happens is that the instincts are there. The instincts to feed hunger. So the more relaxed we are, the more instinctual we are.
Right.
The less relaxed we are, the less instinctual we are. The more we act like cardboard cutouts.
When we're not relaxed.
And so what you're seeing is an ability to disassociate from things, but because food is so primal and so instinctual, that if somebody's trying to control that aspect of their life, or trying to control how you see them interacting in that part of their life, then there's a problem. They don't trust you because they can't really eat in front of you. That's
a great example.
Yeah. This is why people say to each other, we need to break bread together. It's a form of intimacy.
Yeah.
It's unconscious, but it's a form of intimacy. It's like we get together, we eat, we've seen each other when we're in need, when we're in survival mode, and we still trust each other.
Mm. That's a wonderful example. And
So the
so the
go on.
survival aspects that you're talking about are the what have been called the survival archetypes. So
The
I
instincts.
to tie that in, and it's an archetypal pattern that every human being has, are
Absolutely.
these instincts.
Yes. That evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to make us who we are today. Now we have more primitive instincts that evolved before us, before we became the shape we are now, that we call human. When we were single-celled organisms, when we were bacteria, when we were being eaten, when we were being pooped, when we were being stomped on, before we got into this stage, we're still, we still go into the ground. We still end up poop. We still fertilize and we grow again. We see ourselves differently because we're bigger physically than we used to be. That's part of it. So the things that make the instincts are based where? They're based in the collective. So anything that's unconscious has better access to them. So shadow is closer to the instincts than ego, because ego is in the light, it's in the consciousness, it's in a sphere. The ego sphere is like think about you as a little kid. It's just you. Your parents are your tent. If they feel safe, they become your tent. Mommy, daddy, mommy, brother, sister, they become your tent. As you grow up, you start to have a circle around this tent of different things, of people, of situations, of houses, of whatever. Those things is that the growth of the ego. The more stable it is, the more ground it takes. The more ground it takes, the more likely it will be integrated. The more rigid it is, the tighter it is, the smaller the view of consciousness is. This is right, that's wrong. I have to go to church. I have to eat this. I have to not do that. I can't live this way. I have to pay that. I have to pick this up. I have to. If there is always a have to, then the ego is constricted. What does that mean for the shadow? That means the shadow is vast and wild. But what shows in shadow is anger and pain because of the constriction of the ego.
And so what's underneath? So clients that I see, just as an example, when I hear the language of what you just said, I have to do this, and there's a very rigid container in their psyche about good and bad, right and wrong, have to, shoulds, and that language comes out. What I see in someone's physical body somatically, it shows up as major issues with sleeping, with digestion, with pain. That shadow shows up and becomes dense in our tissue. It physically manifests as some type of irritation or sickness when we haven't dealt with it, because we're not aware that it's even in existence.
And it's created because of the ego's constriction.
Yes.
So what the body is telling you is that it's actually, I'm not in pain. They're in pain. I'm just trying to make them aware that they're in pain. I'm trying to wake them up to the possibility that they are not the way they think they are.
Yeah. Which makes it more of an ally versus this black shadow thing that gets a bad rap.
It's dark, it's evil.
Yeah.
It's actually, no, it's the unknown other, because you don't know what it is.
So it's trying to communicate with us all the time.
And it's part of the collective unconscious, right? So the shadow lives in the unconscious, even though it has a will, even though it has its own consciousness, which is kind of a contradiction. It's interesting. It's conscious that it exists.
Mm-hmm. Because when it's named, it shows up. That's what I've seen in my work.
Absolutely.
If I name what I see
Absolutely.
in the body and the somatic part of it, what happens is there's an emotional response. Usually it's tears because it hasn't been named or seen
Yes.
in a human being, and or it's a, who the hell do you think you are, and I'm leaving.
Yeah. So
It'll
you release
can be
it.
one or the other, but it's spoken.
So your work is that you go into the body and release that aspect that is stuck in the body. And once it's released, it comes up to consciousness. And once it comes up to consciousness, it's either I tolerate it
Mhm.
or who the fuck do you think you are? And I'm leaving.
Yes, it's one or the other.
Because
no
I
in
am
between.
completely overwhelmed by my feeling state now
Yes.
that I didn't have before I walked in here. I didn't have a feeling
Yes.
state. Now, feeling state is a normal state of being. You need a feeling state. You need to be able to experience how you are functioning. You need to be able to experience how your body feels. This is very, very important because disease works this way.
Yeah, it does.
If you are not conscious of disease, disease will grow. It will start feeding on you. The more conscious you are, the more likely you will catch it earlier, the more likely it'll be treatable, the more likely you will survive.
I'd like to give an example of that. So just this week, a client just was having a lot of acid and years of issues with digestion.
Yes.
And
that's a great example, by the way.
Yeah,
the stomach,
it is.
Because the stomach holds its tolerance to the world and the way it absorbs the world and the way it takes in the world and how it digests and moves the energy in the world.
Yes.
So digestion is very, very important. Go on.
It is, because otherwise we do not function.
Well, we don't exist. We die.
And so we were working, and I was explaining about the feeling state and how digestion is connected, and feeling some of that anger that creates the acid fire in the body. I'm speaking somatic language. Tears came, lots of tears. And the client said, I don't like to feel that.
And so the tears, before you go on, because this is very interesting, talk about the tears. So that's the body's release.
Yes.
Right, Christy? So how does that work? What is your understanding diagnostically when you see the tears of this person coming? How do you explain it to them? How do you think about it?
For me, when in my work, when someone cries, it's the acknowledgement of what's there. It's bringing light into something that has been in shadow.
Yeah. So
with
you bear
compassion,
witness.
and not judgment, because the bigger piece is the client going into judgment about how awful they are, that they would be a quote angry person. Or if there's so much judgment around even just anger. And really what's underneath anger is usually sadness too. And the tears come, and then the body literally goes, but the feeling is the only way the body can release it. We can't intellectualize that out.
So that's a release.
It's a huge release.
So they're defining it to you. I don't like to feel. They're saying, I don't like to be triggered, but they're not talking about what happened to them. They're talking about what they don't understand is happening to them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Talk more about that.
Yes. So once they understand the connection between that body mind, so feeling angry and having the tears release, the body takes a breath. And then what I explain to people is, okay, once you leave and go out into your life and you feel that emotion come up again, to allow it. And I will tell people, go to the bathroom and take some deep breaths if you feel that fire coming up or the tears, but to allow the space instead of pushing it back down. Because when it gets pushed back down, it's like pushing poison back in.
Yes.
And feelings release the poison. They release what
Beautiful.
comes in at us and how we process based on our childhood. It's
Yes.
not good or bad. Once again, it's just part of being human in that collective that we all share. No one gets a go pass out of that feeling state.
Yes. So the alchemy of healing. The alchemy of
It
healing is
is that.
feeling.
Yes.
So what you're describing is the more we are able to feel our emotions, the more we're able to experience them, the healthier
Experience
we
is a
are.
good word.
Yeah, because we're pushing it outside of psyche. We're repressing it, we're disassociating it. So how does it appear? It appears in the body.
It does. And it appears as neck pain. It appears as one shoulder being higher than the other. It appears as knee pain. It's
Back
patterns
pain.
over time
Yeah.
that get locked in the flesh.
Yes, but they can be unlocked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why
So
I'm
the word
in,
lock is always a problem because it makes you think that it's permanent. It's not.
I would use the word trapped then. They get trapped in the body and they don't know a way out.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, no, I think trapped or locked. I think because a lock has a key.
as a key.
Yeah.
Yes.
We don't think about the lock and the key. We just think of a lock and the lost key. You are the lost key for the lock when it comes to the body. That's what you do so
Yes.
well, brilliantly. So that energetic release that Christy is describing in terms of tears, that release is healing. That's a transformative release. You took something that was locked, trapped, disassociated, disconnected, held in the body, now released through the body with tears.
Yes.
Right? So what is locked in the body? Well, so where does the shadow reside? The shadow resides in the body.
Yes, it does.
You can see it on people's faces. If you go into extreme situations, if you've ever been to a prison, if you've ever been to a refugee camp, if you've ever been to a disaster, if you've ever been to a place where people feel powerless, or their power has been taken away, or they're traumatized, or they're scared, what you're going to see is the trap.
Yeah.
You're going to see how they're trapped in their bodies, because the first thing you notice is how they move or how they do not move.
Yeah.
How there is lack of movement on their part. How even their facial expressions are static. How their eyes are almost hollow. They're looking at you, but they're almost look like they're receded back into their heads. What you're seeing is trauma. What you're seeing is how they are being held within the body. Well, where is shadow? Shadow is in the body. So when shadow is able to come out of body, so body work, or come to Christy. Body work helps you release energetically what is being held in the body. Or jam, that helps you release what is disassociated, disconnected, also held in the body. It helps you reintegrate that part.
I
So
think
when
Dr. Lahab,
yes,
I agree with you 100%. And I think that's also it's an intellectual idea that, yes, it's trapped in the body and we want to move it out, but it really comes to a commitment within ourselves to lean into some of the fear, because that's the piece where I see people stop.
always fear.
Is I'm afraid.
It's
I'm
always
afraid
fear.
of what
It's always
is
trauma.
in here and what you'll release.
Yeah.
Once someone said, and this is the best example, and it's present, something happened to someone I love, and I offered to do some work to help because it was very traumatic for them.
Yeah.
And the response was, I can't do that. The demons will get released.
Yeah.
Because
So we hold on to
it's-
the demons.
It's an awareness.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Because
that's a really good
fear
example,
of
because then
feeling it
we hold on to that which is making us sick.
because of fear,
Counterintuitive.
but it's unconscious fear.
Exactly. But it's
That's
counterintuitive.
conscious.
It's like if we
Yes.
release it, we feel better. But counterintuitively, what you're saying is the person doesn't know they can feel better.
If they feel.
They don't know they can feel. How is that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Because
That's
it
a little
scares the
better.
shit out of them.
Because they've never experienced that.
Yeah.
At least consciously, they haven't experienced it in a long time. Because everybody experiences release in a different way.
Yes.
Right. And the longer you haven't had one, the more the buildup is scary.
Yes. And the walls become stronger and there's more locks on the doors.
Yes. Let's
In the
put more
body.
locks on the door until we start to really, really hurt.
And
And
that's oftentimes those are the people that I see.
Yeah.
Usually you get to a point where no matter what or how strange it might be for them, I'll do whatever it takes because it hurts too much.
Yeah. I can't take
Because
it anymore.
the body,
Until you get to the point, until the body, until your body says, you are not in good shape. You cannot take this anymore. Can you take
and nor are
any
you
more of
in
this?
control.
Yes.
The body says no. That is
Well,
that is-
control, this is the biggest illusion. The illusion is that
Mhm.
we have some form of control. Like we have
Yeah.
forms of control. I mean, we barely have forms of control over body functions, but that somehow we have control over psychic functions outside of our awareness
right.
that are disassociated from us. Because what we're talking about is you do not have control over the disassociated aspects of you. Those dissociative aspects show up in the body.
Yes.
They show up in the gut. They show up in the bile. They show up in the acid. They show up in the chest. They show up in the head. They show up in the eyes. They show up in the ears, in the mouth. They show up where you're terrified of them not showing up. Where do you look at? Like if you brush your teeth constantly and you want them to be pearly whites, that's where they show up. The body knows how to get your attention.
Yeah, it does.
The body knows how to call you out. Hey, why is your hair falling out? You were fine yesterday. Maybe something is wrong. And then the body's talking to you.
And that's the shadow aspect again. That isn't good or bad.
Well, the body is where the shadow resides. So
Yeah.
what is talking to you is shadow. What
And
is telling you it's time to heal is shadow.
Yes.
Ego will take you to the physician, the shaman, the magician, the healer, to the witch. But the body, the shadow in the body, is the one that says it's time for this to go.
And that is a walk. How I would like to put this into context. That is a walk into the dark and I really believe that's where you need a guide or someone that has the ability to go in with you. So you're not afraid and you don't run away again, but to walk slowly in so you can look.
I am not afraid.
Fear.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to face the fear. This is why we repeat over and over again the affirmation, I am not afraid. I'm not afraid of what's happening. I'm not afraid of my past. I'm not afraid of my future. I'm not afraid of existing. I am not afraid of being the person I want to be. I am not afraid. That is the question that always shows up.
Yeah.
What shows up? Fear. Fear of what? Fear of the traumatic event. Fear of the glitch.
Mm-hmm.
Fear that the glitch, that there's no key to the glitch.
The key is always present.
Yes.
In the body.
And the hand that
Always.
you hold. If you hold the door in one hand, that's locked. You hold the key in the other hand.
Mm-hmm.
The key is always yours. The key is the one that's going to release you from this nightmare that is occurring. The more it's a nightmare, the more it's your own creation. Because if you had the nightmare because you were traumatized and you don't treat the trauma, the boundaries of the nightmare grows. Why is it a nightmare? Because the body is telling you it's time to heal.
Yeah.
It's time to stop feeling, thinking, and acting in this way. Time to move yourself past this pain, this disconnection.
And it's such a sacred space. It sounds like we're having a conversation, and I just would like to say that that space of going into the body and going into the feeling is can be extremely vulnerable. And to make sure if that's a desire that you have, whoever you find, to find someone that is well qualified to do that with you.
Absolutely.
Because it isn't willy-nilly, oh, let's clear our shadow, which I think is some of the narrative being expressed online of we can snap our fingers and look at shadow and then it goes away.
Well, you clear your shadow, you are left with a humongous ego that's gonna, under its weight, is gonna crush everything that you believe in. The shadow is balance.
It is balance.
The shadow is liberty. The shadow is freedom. The shadow is truth for those who don't know. The shadow is the actual truth. The shadow doesn't lie. The ego lies. The shadow doesn't lie.
No.
The shadow, when you hear it, it's very clear. It's very clear. If it says, I hate your fucking guts. If you've been listening to a different album coming from the ego, a different song that says it wasn't me, then you know who's lying. The shadow doesn't lie. That's why they tell you trust your instincts, right?
Yes.
If somebody tells you something about themselves, then it's true. Well,
and your body will tell you that.
But that's shadow.
Yes.
What they misunderstand is that if somebody tells you about themselves, yeah, the ego can tell you about yourself, but it's actually shadow that's telling you about who I am. My shadow is the one that is available to answer all questions. Ego is not available to answer questions. Ego can only tell you what it needs you to believe. The ego lives in consciousness. It needs you to stay in consciousness. What it basically the ego is doing is it is saying to you over and over again, this is where you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be anywhere else. Forget about everything else that's going on. Stay here.
Yeah, this is safe.
This is safe. What I tell you is right. Everything else you hear is not. Don't believe those voices. So you don't trust yourself. Don't believe the voices is you not trusting self.
And the voices are, I can't emphasize this enough. The voices they're in the flesh. And we will speak it. Oh, I just felt sick, or I felt the hair on the back of my neck come up, made me clench my jaw, my toes curled. We will speak the language of the body without being aware that it's giving us the message.
Even though the words are coming out of our mouth.
They're coming out of our mouth, but we don't want to listen because of what the ego tells us. But the body can't lie. It can't lie.
It won't lie.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It won't lie. The body won't lie to you. The body will tell you, because the body has the body, to the body, you are basically, you're talking to somebody who's straight up. This is what I can do.
And this is what I'm holding, which is the difficult part to hear, is what I see is how it's showing up. That is the blind spot of the ego.
A client started asking about narcissism and how narcissism shows up. And I was trying to explain to the client that narcissism is part of the development of the ego. The ego, when it's 2, when it's 3 years old, starts to say, this is mine. That's me. That's mine. That's mine. That's mine. If that is disrupted in any way, narcissistic traits will appear instead, where that should be mine. I don't know why they don't give it to me. I don't know why I don't get this. I don't know why don't they think of me in this way? I don't know. I want this. This is me. And then you start to see the narcissistic traits. And what that means is that child at 2 or 3 was severely disrupted. So you start to see the narcissistic aspects. So the client, to get back to the client, she said, how do you heal that? And my response to her was, when it comes to you, when you're feeling that way, when you're feeling selfish, when you're feeling like the world is not giving you your fair share, what you are being triggered by is fear. The child is being triggered by fear because they were not allowed to have their feeling state when they needed to have it at developmentally appropriate time. So you need to face your fear. I'm not afraid that people haven't acknowledged me yet, because I am here anyway. I acknowledge that I exist. I acknowledge that I live here, that I am loved here, that I am a creator here. So every time that comes up for you as an individual, where you start to feel like, oh, you're feeling like the child inside is being wronged, what you're being triggered by is fear. And this is where we say, I am loved. I am not afraid. I am not alone. I am wanted. I am needed. I am whole. I am self. I am light. Because that is exactly what it is. That's the way we face certain issues. They don't, as Christy says, it's very difficult to go to somebody and say, I don't like feeling. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Can we keep this without feeling? I've had clients who don't want to feel. As soon as they
I
start
hear that
feeling,
a lot.
They quit. They don't want to continue. It's like, well, no, I was being too emotional.
Yes, like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I have numerous people that will say before they're referred to me when they come in, now just be prepared, you're probably going to cry.
Ooh,
And the amount of fear that that can put in people is very real
ooh,
because they haven't been able to feel, just like what you said,
ooh.
from childhood. Well, you shouldn't feel that way,
Yeah.
or you get in trouble if you do feel. That's
Yeah.
so real in adulthood. It
Yeah.
doesn't go away
Don't
until we look
react.
at it.
Don't you know any better?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
Grow up.
Shut up. Grow
Yeah.
up.
That's so real in
Don't be a
adulthood.
crybaby. So we have a lot of adults who are, their inner child is terrified. And what we say inner child, I'm not talking about this miniature child that resides in your belly. I am talking about the child you were, the
Yeah.
child you once were. Those feeling states you carry for the rest of your life. Like any other part of your life. But those are the building blocks. Those are the steps that you took to be who you are. Everything is built upon that. So if you think of a building, let's take the John Hancock. John Hancock is a huge building. It's in downtown Chicago. So imagine that the John Hancock and its age, the youngest part of it is the poor. Before that, there was a dig.
Mm.
So that concrete that was poured into the dig, if it has cracks, if it has bubbles, that building would not stand. After a while, that building would start to be condemned. That building would fall apart. But it stands like a symbol of power, like a mountain, because it was built that way. That poor, people paid attention to the poor. The poor is your childhood. That concrete pour is your childhood. That's what it used to bother me a lot when I was trying to explain to people why these children were behaving the way they were. I worked in with the Department of Children and Family Services as a consultant, a contractor, a therapist, long time ago. But I would try to explain to them what happened to this child and trying to get a conscious recognition of why what happened to them colors everything they see and do,
Mhm.
and why that poor, that needs to change. And I wasn't sure how to, how to dig up that pour. That pour has already been poured.
Right.
So what do we do? Well, that's why we have JAMP. JAMP resolved that because you could go into the deepest recesses and fix those holes. And take out the air pockets. And take out the cracks. But at that time, it was very complicated. And I was very, very young. And it was complicated and it was hard. And it was harder for these kids who couldn't control themselves, who were so disturbed by it. So look, in hindsight, I could always say, well, we could have taken JAMP and done this. But we have JAMP now, and we can use that to heal those aspects. So in that original pour is where the unknown other exists. It is in that original pour. It is in that original pour where the ego started making claims on the world. What is mine? What is right? What is wrong? When you were a child and you were scared. I know as a child I was scared. I know, I remember it. I could feel it as Christy said, I could feel those days, but not sure of what, but I know it was a trauma. Because that's when you start to feel fear, is when something happens that your ego consciousness can't explain to you. Your ego consciousness says, well, you know, stuff happens. No.
Yes, and we start to intellectualize and let it use languaging to outthink it or outrun it. And we can't, it's in us. We can't outrun something that is in our bodies.
It's in us, it's around us, it lives through us.
Yeah.
So in every way you think about it, it's the air that you breathe. If you think the air is heavy or contaminated, it's the way you're thinking about the world. I'm not talking about the pollution outside. I'm just talking about trying to breathe in the morning if you have oxygen. Trying to stand up, trying to clear your head. There's a lot of things that rattle in my head at times, Christy, if I share something. And it's all the ways that people have hurt me or misunderstood me or taking things out of context with me, or niggles, I call them, from past. And they're kind of there. There's like a white noise. It comes and goes. And this is part of the glitch. They still show up and make you feel like, oh shit, you know, why did they do that? Or why did they think that? Or why did they say that?
Mm-hmm.
Or why did they react that way? Why didn't they ask me? Or why didn't they talk to me? Or why didn't they really tell me what they were thinking or feeling or doing? Or why is this upsetting me? It's happened years ago and I don't give a shit about it, and it's gone and it's done, but it keeps coming back.
Yeah.
It comes back because the initial feelings in childhood were of not being understood, of not being heard, of not being listened to. So now it plays itself out in incidents in my mind of experiences that I've had. And so the echo now pings off these voices, right? And there's this tendency for people to think, well, you know, all you have to do is like pick up a phone and talk to all these people and make things work.
Yeah, I wish it were that simple.
It's not that easy. That's
No.
not what stays. What stays is the feeling state that's been triggered.
Yes.
It's not them, it's the feeling state. It's the feeling state of being misunderstood. It's the feeling state of not being heard. It's the feeling state of being told that you're something that you're not.
Well, and it's easy. I think for me, it's easy to identify when you're around your original family, because that becomes really clear sometimes and quickly of an interaction that can turn that light on really fast about how it used to feel, or remind you one of those voices is much louder.
Yeah.
Because you're back in that state of when the cement was poured.
Yes.
And a bubble will come up. And for me,
and you will see the bubble.
Yes. And that to me can be very challenging. And it's also a key for me to unlock a piece of myself again, that doesn't have to rule my world, and the child in me doesn't have to do my living.
Yeah. So let's not blame our shadow, our unknown other, for all of our pain, anger, and resentment. But the more we become conscious of the complex, of the archetype, right? The self is trying to expand our awareness of the world, our awareness of our existence. That's why you have so many different ideas as you age. That's why they change. Like, this used to be important, that's no longer important. This is important now.
And
This used to be-
awareness, observing yourself, observing your body is a really good place to start.
Mm,
Is to notice when you're around someone and you get a stomach ache or a headache, that is your body communicating for you to look at these pieces.
yeah,
And even if it's just one piece,
yeah. And don't focus on the other.
right? It's you.
Focus on you
Yes.
and your body.
Yes.
Don't focus on what they're doing, but focus on your body and your feeling state.
Yes.
Do you feel safe? Do you feel secure? Do you feel calm?
And if not, how can you make yourself feel safe? How can you take a pause
And
and
how you
feel
could tell
safe?
the other that, hey, by the way, when you do stuff, when you say these things, I get this weird feeling.
Yeah.
So just so you know what the look on my face is. Because I think what happens is that when we are traumatized and abused at a very young age, we start to hear and see abuse and trauma wherever we are.
Yes.
And
Reflects back to us.
we start to look for it.
Yeah.
If
Hyper
things are,
aware.
if somebody is being too nice, we start looking for trauma. If somebody is being too kind or too empathic or too caring,
Mhm.
then we start, especially if the trauma was intimate. And what I mean intimate means that somebody who is really close to you, which is most trauma,
Yeah.
by a father, by a mother, by a sister, by a neighbor, by an aunt, by an uncle. It's most trauma. So that's why we start to project on other people what we fear most, which is what happened to us at a very early age.
Mhm.
We don't even see ourselves the way we are now. We don't even think that, wait a second, I'm an adult. Like, if this person is making me feel weird, I should tell them. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you doing that? I should be able to have that conversation without assuming that this person is up to no good. Because that's what we do. We run and hide and make up stories about others. But it's our own internal fear, it's our own internal anxiety, it's our own internal resting state. Because we don't really have a resting state when we're traumatized. There is no resting state. We're hypervigilant all the time.
Yeah.
We're always in fight, flight, and freeze mode all the time. We're always on the edge. And that edge, that glitch, that trauma is what holds the key to the psychic prison, to the door in the psychic prison. Once we're able to treat it, we could walk out its door. The longer we linger in it, the more it eats us up.
Yeah.
It will make us alone. It will disconnect us from society, friends, family, possibility, work, interactions with people, creating long relationships with people, creating community, creating friendship. It will interfere over and over and over again. And what we will do is we will blame other people instead of seeing what happened to us as our main steering. What happened to us is the driver who runs your car. It's the one that chauffeurs you around all day. And it's the one you listen to the most.
Mhm.
So when I say trust your instincts, I mean trust your instincts. I don't mean trust your paranoia, your suspicion, your fear. I mean trust your instincts. You have to watch out for your fear. You have to watch out for your anger. You have to watch out for the disruption. And anytime you're unsure, ask the question, is it my imagination or is this happening? And sometimes it's the illusion.
Yeah.
I walked out of a Hilton or somewhere. I was in a foreign country. I don't want to say the name, but anyway, I walked out of a hotel. I was having a great day. I was in a foreign country. I enjoy travel. I enjoy being in different places. And I walked out and I asked a cab driver if he could take me to where my hotel is. I walked out of one hotel going to. I didn't like the way he answered me. I didn't feel safe in the way he answered. Now, was he up to no good? Maybe. Was it lost in communication? Probably. Could have been I was feeling unsafe because I was in a foreign country? Probably. Could have been the time of night and seeing this person with these other people who are standing around talking. It was just a bunch of cab drivers talking. Maybe. Not sure. But that day, I wouldn't get into a cab. It was like 1 o'clock. I finally found a cab somewhere else. And I took it and I was able to get home, but nothing happened. But my mind took me to all kinds of crazy places.
And maybe nothing happened though, too, Dr. Lahab, is because you listened to that
Probably.
instinct that
But
you
this is
just
why I say
talked about.
probably. Because there were all other circumstances running. But because I've been in foreign places before and because I travel a lot, I tend to trust my first instinct and I don't second guess it. But if you were with friends, if you were with family, if you were with people you knew, if you are, or people you're getting to know, a conversation needs to be had. You can't just run. You can't just get paranoid. You really need to face it. In that instant, for me, the safer thing was not to even go there. Just trust I don't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in these places, no. Because the more you bring them into consciousness, the more you see what they are and who they are and what is going on with you, the more you're able to build community, the more you're able to, because it's also feeling safe. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't feel safe. I'm going to tell this person I don't feel safe. And this is why I don't feel safe. And they could tell me whatever they want, whether I take it, lump it, or do whatever with it. That's my choice. But I am going to have that conversation. If I don't have that conversation, I will never have that conversation. I will keep avoiding that conversation. And then I'm always unsure. Is it me? Is it the other? The more disassociated we are from the unknown other, from the shadow, the more we're going to blame the other.
And
don't
have fear.
Because we don't have a shadow.
Yeah.
So it must be your shadow, Christy. It's not mine. I don't have one. You hold it. It's your fault. So when you're a kid, who holds the shadow? The people who are bigger than you.
Yeah.
They hold your shadow. And if they act out, your shadow is being fed a very bad education.
And it creates another shadow dysfunction in your own family if you don't heal that.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we talk about, intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, it's exactly what that is.
If you terrorize your child, if you are a father and you terrorize your child, and she's a female and she grows up into the world and she is of college age and she's terrified of other males or other older males or males around her, this is always going to be a problem for her, because that's half the population. So I have to deal with this half,
Or not.
hopefully.
Yeah.
But you know, that's why you had so many nuns joining monasteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was safer. It felt safe.
It felt safer.
Yeah. Not necessarily was safer
It
once they were in
wasn't.
it.
Yeah. It wasn't safer, but it felt safer.
Yeah.
The idea felt safer. All right. Well, we kind of really kind of dug in today. Yeah. We really dug in today. We really kind of dug the hole to pour the concrete. The more we talk about how the pour is, the more you'll understand that shadow, the unknown other, the ability of you to be conscious of body is also your ability to be conscious of shadow.
Yeah. And
Just
you
like
don't have to be afraid of it.
Yeah. That you can move in the world in this way. So until next week, when Destiny Calls returns, Christy, do you have any last words for today's podcast?
Yes. For those of you who are listening, I would challenge you to pay attention to your bodily reactions to certain people, and that can be positive or not. I would like you to just start to notice what it feels like in your body when you're reacting to a situation or a relationship, so you can become familiar with your own guidance system.
Well, that's great. And I would add that you have that conversation with yourself. Remember what it's saying. Remember the words that the person who's conversing with you, it's another aspect of you, is saying to you from the experience of the body.
Yeah.
So, because what you're looking for is understanding the symbols of what is being said.
Mm-hmm.
It's not literal. The body is symbolic. It's not literal. That's how the body communicates. That's also how the mind works. The body works, it's symbolic. The elbow, symbol. The knee, symbol. Stomach, symbol.
Mm-hmm.
What is the conversation? What is the conversation you're having psychically? Because of what Christy's talking about, is paying attention to your body. Also, pay attention to the conversation.
Yes.
Because that will tell you a lot about where you are, where you need to be, and what's going on. The more conscious you become, the further your consciousness spreads, the more the boundaries of your consciousness takes in, the more open you are to different ideas and thoughts, theories, books, conversations, the more you will be able to see what is happening and not become controlled by what's happening. You're able to understand it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fabulous conversation.
Well, thank you for this week's conversation. We will be back next week. All right. Take care, everybody.